All right. Hello. Right? I know, right? It's kind of weird. I thought, I have this pulpit in the back. It's just been sitting there. I'm just going to pull it out and see what it looks like. It's been in the back hallway for like, I don't know, a year, 2 years, 3 years. I don't know, a long time. Long time. So I needed my table for something else, right? So I thought, let's just try this out. So anyways, we'll see. This might be the last time, the first time, the last time you see this. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I would rather have like a smaller table because that seems too big sometimes. Anyways, off the subject. Let's go. You guys ready? All right, fantastic. Let's all turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4. I know your reading was Deuteronomy chapter 5, and I was going to just say, let's not have a sermon tonight. I'm not going to prepare anything. I'm just going to allow you guys to ask questions on chapter 5, and then that'll be the night. But then I thought, maybe I should give you some advance warning. We'll do that in another week. Because last week I said, how many people have read your Torah portions? Did you read your Torah portions this week? Absolutely. Good job, right? Fantastic. So you have these little books that we printed out. Allie in the back spent a lot of time putting these together, hours upon hours. And they have questions and notes in here. And so the questions part is for you to bring to tonight, right? And so one of these weeks, we're actually going to not teach. We're just going to answer your questions or maybe ask more questions based on your questions. So, but we're not going to tell you when. I'm just giving you forewarning that that's what we're going to do. So, chapter 4, verse 13. Who can read verse 13 for me? Chapter 4, Deuteronomy 4, 13. Who's got me?
I got you. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, the 10 Commandments, and he wrote them down on 2 tablets of stone.
Fantastic. And so when I think about this verse, there's always a video that is years old, and you guys younger guys wouldn't remember it. Maybe you might remember it, Walt. Lindley, you probably have seen this too. But I've seen this, and every time I watch this video, it's like, that's probably exactly how it happened. So Allie's going to play us a little video here.
Lord, I shall give these laws unto thy people. Hear me, oh, hear me. All pay heed. The Lord Jehovah, has given unto you these 15.
Boy.
10 commandments, all to obey.
I mean, isn't that how it could have happened, right? Oi. So Moses is given these commandments by God. And a lot of times we have these thoughts about them, and there's all kinds of writings, especially if you get into the Jewish commentary. There's all of these things that talk about the commandments. And a lot of times they call them the 10 commandments or the 10 words. Aaron was around when we talked about this years ago where we found a lot of commentary where they called them the 10 suggestions, right? They're suggestions, things for how to live, which was a fascinating thing we talked about a long time ago. But one of the themes that I found many times is that unlike what you have in your Bible, a lot of times the commentators will point back to this was expanded upon later, but the original tablets that Moses originally came down with wasn't like these full-on sentences, like how do you write all of this, on a small tablet, right? How do you get it all on here? How do you chisel it out? I mean, how does that look? And so what we found in our research was that more than likely the first tablets that were put in the covenant were not 10 full paragraphs or sentences, they were 10 letters, right? And each letter represented the command. And one of the things that we learned for the years of studying is that, if you remember, we've talked about the Hebrew language is a phenomenological language. You guys remember what that is? Big word, phenomenological. Keith, can you say that? No, don't even try. Phenomenological, right? It's difficult, right? It's this difficult word, but we've spent a lot of time on it. It's this idea, phenomenological is about experience, right? And the Hebrew language is about pictures and experiences. See, unlike the English language where we put letters together to make sentences, in the ancient Hebrew, they put pictures together to create ideas and thoughts and experiences. And this is how they read the text. This is how they communicated, through pictures. And so the very first tablets that we have from God were written in pictures. And so we're going to go through a few of these today and see how these pictures actually apply to our life, these suggestions, how these suggestions apply to our life. And so the first one, this is actually a representative of the first tablet. The first tablet, the first commandment is what? What's the first commandment? What? Love God with all your heart. It's a little later. Close. That's the second commandment. What is it? Oh, man, it's difficult, right? So let's go to the picture. What? Oh, that's a good idea, right? It's not one of those commandments that you would think of. The first commandment is what? I am the Lord your God, right? The first commandment corresponds with the first letter of the alphabet, Aleph. Now, later you see actually it was turned in the Greek and the English and so on and so forth, but that actually looks like an A, right? But the Aleph, before it was that, if you see up here, what does that look like at the top there? We'll stop reading next to it. Right? The Aleph was the head of an ox, right? It was the head of an ox, right? As well as Aleph is the first letter. Letter Aleph in English, we don't have letters that correspond to numbers, but in the Hebrew language, every Hebrew letter had a numerical value. The very first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, was the number what? 1, right? The picture that you see up here was the picture that you would, in this phenomenological language, you would look at an ox, right? And so what do we find from an ox? Like if you are somebody who comes from the ancient Near Eastern culture, who came out of slavery and you've been working in the fields and doing this all of your life, what does the ox represent? Take that off. Yes, I put those on too fast. I should not have done that. Aleph represents what is first. It represents strength, power. It represents what always goes in front, because the ox is what pulls. And so the idea of Aleph is this idea of what is it that should always go before me? Right? Aleph, I am the Lord your God. Aleph, I am Yah, Yod, He, Vav, He. I am your first. I am your strength. I am what goes before anything else in your life. The first commandment doesn't seem like a commandment like, you shall do this. It's just, I am. Yod, He, Vav, He. It's for you to ask the question, how do I make him first? How do I trust that he is my strength? How do I put him in front of everything that I do? The first commandment is more like a question. How do I do this? Go ahead.
Back in town when college, whatever.
Sure.
Was there, a Hebrew, language there, or was it all, like you said, was it just the pictures? You saying, or did they have letters in there?
Those were the letters. The pictures were the letters. Mm-hmm. And so they would put the pictures together, and that would make a word or a sentence, right? So you would put Aleph and Bet together, and Aleph represents strength, and I'll tell you what Bet means here in a minute. Give me a minute. Let me get to the second letter, and I'll show you how these pictures come together, and these word pictures come together, and they make a new word, right? Or make more of a word.
I guess what's interesting is that, so the scholars eventually took that first letter,
Mm-hmm.
right, and comes up and says, okay, this is what the first commandment was. They put Aleph in it, they say, okay, I am the Lord your God.
Well, I don't know if it was the scholars that came up with the rest of it. I mean, it came somewhere. Yeah, no, this is ancient. So this might have been, whoever wrote down on the parchment of the Torah, the paper that we have, right? Wherever that was later written into that. And in fact, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you guys are familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? They found them in Israel in 1940s, right? These caves. They still have parchment with this Paleo Hebrew on some of the parchment, right? It was still kept up until the 1st century, that long, right? Although it had been, changed when they went to Babylon and they started to change the language, and you can see over the hundreds of years how the language started to change. But some of the most ancient documents, we still have this, right? So this then goes back to what Malou said, right? Here's the first commandment, I am the Lord your God. What does Yeshua say the most important out of all the commandments are? Love the Lord your God, right? There's nothing more important than this. The first suggestion, the first commandment is, I am. Yud He, Vav He. In fact, in the wisdom literature, Proverbs, it says, right? The fear of the Lord, the awe, the wonder of the Lord is the beginning. You want to be wise, you want to be an influential person, you want to lead people, you want to be somebody who people look to say, I want to hear what you say, I want to do what you do, I want to know why you do what you are, how you are the way you are. It comes first from this idea that the awe of the Lord, everything comes after him. Everything comes after him. Bet. Don't put it up there yet, Alec, because some people cheat. Bet is what, right? That is the second letter here. What does that look like? That'll be my Vanna. A tent. Very good. Well, very similar. Yeah, absolutely. Right? A little trailer, you could do a very similar thing, right? What do people live in the ancient Near Eastern culture? What do they live in? They live in a tent, right? A hut. maybe depending on where you are, yeah, maybe the islanders, right? But most people live in some sort of tent, or if you're in Egypt, you have a blockhouse. But in the ancient Near Eastern culture, for this, these people that move, right, they live in tents. It's this idea that, numerical value, what's the numerical value of bet? 2, right? So it's the second thing. So the idea of a tent, and you have tents. First thing that I would probably ask you, or not, I know Aaron. The first thing that Aaron would ask you if you had a trailer, like you said, in your house, is what? He looks at your trailer. What's the first question he would ask? Yeah. That would be the second question Aaron would ask. The first question Aaron would ask would be what? What's in it?
Okay.
Right? Well, more than likely, he would want to know what's inside. The idea of the tent being the second commandment is just that. What's inside? What's inside your tent? What do you have behind that? You can look at it as a tent, you can look at it as a trailer, but you can also look at what's inside you. The second commandment is what is inside you. What's inside your home, your sanctuary, your heart? Deuteronomy 5, 7 through 10 says what? Do you have Deuteronomy 5? You got it. Aaron, you got it? 7 through 10.
You shall no other God before me. You shall make yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments.
What's the first commandment again? I am, right? I am number 1. Nothing comes before me. I am your strength. Number 2 is what? Bet. What's inside your house? What's usually inside your house? What's inside a tent? In the ancient Near Eastern culture, that's where you kept your valuables, right? That's where you kept your gods. What's the second most important thing, maybe the first and most important thing for an ancient Near Eastern culture person to keep in his tent? Still to this day. It's the most important thing The most valuable thing in your life? Family. Right? Family is the most important thing that you keep in your tent, that you keep in your home. Right? That is the most important thing. The question is then, do they know commandment number 1? Does your house, does your heart, does it uphold commandment number 1? Or do you walk into your house and see the pagan idols of the foreign land? Do you have the carved images? Do you have, maybe to today's, instead of you have carved images, do you have materialism? Is materialism your God? Sometimes, for some people, even our kids can become idols. They can become more important than God. When you walk into your house, is there anything in your house that is more important than the first commandment? Because if so, then you've broke the second commandment. Bet. What is in your sanctuary? What is in your house? What is in your heart? Matthew 15 says, oh, I don't have it. Matthew 15, 18, 19 says this. I have it right here. Matthew 15, 18 and 19. But what comes out of the mouth comes from the heart, and these defile the man. For out of the heart comes forth wicked reasonings, murders, adulteries, whorings, thefts, false witnesses, and slanders. He's talking about this. Yeshua says, what's in your heart? What's in your house? Because what's in there, it's going to come out. Third commandment. Number 3. What in the world is that? Or a question mark? She's missing a period? That's good, yeah. What else? This is something that nobody in this room would ever get because it's not a part of our culture. What? A staff, that's close, yeah. It looks like a gimel. You are right. That's a gimel. It is a gimel. That is the letter. Yeah, that's different. It's flipped. And it's you have different arguments between different Paleo-Hebrew, so you can look this up. But gimel is the picture of a camel. Camel's head. That one has a camel's foot. But it's the idea of a camel. We don't have. Who owns a camel? Anybody own a camel in here? You own a camel? Nobody owns a camel in here, right? That's just like, I don't get it. Imagine, you guys have seen pictures of a real camel, correct? When you look at a camel, what do you do? What's the first thing that you have to do with your head when you look at a camel? No, stop. What's the first thing you have to do with your head when you look at a camel, Walt? You have to look up. That's right. That's why it's hard for this culture, right? I've never seen a...
They get down on their knees in order for you to get on them.
Right. A camel's tall, right? The head especially is tall, right? When it lifts its head up, it's way up there. The first thing you have to do when you look at a camel is look up. The idea of a camel's head is that it is up. It's high. The pictograph of this idea of a camel is the idea of lifting something up, exalting something. What is it that we have to lift up? What is it that we're supposed to lift up? What? God. Very good. Because why? What's the first commandment? What's the first commandment? I am. The number 1, the first thing in your life. Nothing more comes before me. So what should we do with that most important thing? We lift it up. We raise that on high. Because Deuteronomy 5:11 says what? You're still looking at me like, I don't know where you're at. Aaron, 5:11 says what?
You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold you guiltless in Jesus' name.
We are to lift up the name of the Lord, not desecrate it, not smear it, right? Not put it down. We are to lift up God's name. How do we do that? How do you lift up God's name? Representation. What does that mean? How do you represent God's name?
I'm a child of God, and I need to act in an
Okay.
appropriate way.
Great. So your actions represent God's name in an appropriate manner. How else? How else can we lift up God's name? What? Your words. Do words matter? Words do matter. So the words that come out of our mouth, they can be uplifting, they can be honoring to God, or they can also be destructive. Right? Have you ever gotten in a fight with your spouse and said something, you're like, oh, I can't believe I said that? Right? Andrew's never had that problem. Me, maybe a few times. Right? Or maybe to your kids. Have you ever said something in the heat of the moment where you said something to your kids and you're like, the worst part is when your spouse says you shouldn't have said that. Right? Oh, that's even worse, right? How we speak to people with love, compassion, with mercy. Here's another one. What about listening? Is that a way to honor God? Sure, we can work with our hands, we can speak, but how often are you intentional about listening to the person speaking to you? How often do we get caught up in listening to somebody, thinking about what I'm going to do next, or thinking about something else, or thinking about, well, they just said this, so I have to think about how to combat them, and I stop listening to them? Is that honoring God? With your words, your intention of listening, your actions? How we treat people with good character, showing trustworthiness. It's about who we are. Lift it up. Because like I shouldn't say every most football teams, baseball teams, right? Sports teams, what's the thing that they have on the front of their jersey? Who you play for. And who you play for and how you act on that field, you are now representing that team. And if each one of you in here believes that you are a child of God, you represent that team. That's what's in the front of your shirt every single day that you wake up. Because the number one commandment is what? What's the first commandment? I am. Aleph. Nothing is more important. Nothing else goes before me. That's what's the most important thing. Fourth commandment. Looks like a tongue. It just needs a piercing right there. What is it? A yoke? Oh, a yoke. Okay, I can see that. Yeah. Anybody else? You already know. Don't cheat. Right? In the ancient Near Eastern culture. Yes, there you go. You are ancient. There you go. Thanks for admitting it. All right. I'm just kidding. And this is one of those moments where my wife says, right? Deborah, I apologize.
I walked into that. It's okay.
In the ancient Near Eastern culture, the second commandment was what? Bet. Right? House, tent, sanctuary. How do you get into such a tent? Right? I know you can't see this, but it was like this. Right? That's a door. Unlike our doors with wood, in the ancient Near Eastern culture, thousands of years ago, it was just a sheet, a tent, a sheet that was in front of the tent that you had to walk through. This was the pathway. If I want to get inside or go to the next part of the section of the tent, I have to walk through the doorway. It was a sheet. Dalet symbolizes just that, a pathway, a door. The door that leads me to something else. Every week, we are to enter through that door into what? Deuteronomy 5:12.
Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you.
One more time.
Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you.
Dalet. Every week, we are to walk through a doorway into what? What are we walking into? The Sabbath. Every week, we are called to walk through this pathway, walk through this doorway, out of where our normal circumstances are and into something else. How often do we think of the Sabbath as something totally different that I have to walk into? It is a different space, a different time. It's not just the ordinary, the mundane, the regular stuff that we do. I am to walk through this door into something else every Friday night when the sun goes down. Do we see it that way? Do we see that when the sun goes down on Friday night, I walk through a doorway? Or is it just like any other night? Is it just like any other day? Is it different? Mm-hmm. A space in time. Yes, he does. It's not like anything else. Yeah, it's powerful. And it can be powerful if we, what was the first word? Observe it. A backwards E, okay? Anybody? That's a difficult one. You can see. Yeah, and that's actually closer to the original. It's a little bit different. This is turned sideways later on. It was turned sideways, but the original is like this, right? If you're a soccer player, where's Chris? Oh, he's not in here. You say, goal, right? Or if you're a football player, you're like, right? Touchdown, right? Or if you're a worshiper, you do what? Hallelujah. Praise, hallelujah. There you go. Good job, right? The fifth commandment is hey. Right? That's the fifth letter of the alphabet. Hey. It's a picture of a man with his hands raised like a field goal, right? The idea, the picture behind it is he's pointing at something. He's revealing something. He's saying, look, look. You ever seen somebody who speaks with their hands? They're like, look, let me tell you something. Behold. The idea that is connected to this is behold the honor or respect of something. One of the greatest things that separates the Greek culture, where we get a lot of our ideas from, and the Hebraic culture is this command right here. If you study history and you go all the way back to Aristotle and Plato, the West has seen less and less of an importance on the family. In fact, it was Plato in Plato's Republic where he said that kids should be taken from their parents to learn from the state at an early age. Family has less value in the Western culture than it does in the biblical culture. Which is why the biblical narrative in the fifth commandment, hey, is so important. The biblical view of family is what? I mean, as we think about, if you go back all the way back to Genesis, and you read through the stories all the way back to Deuteronomy today, what are all the stories about? Are they not about families? Are they not about Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Noah and his family and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and this lineage that continues on and on? And are they not about families? Everything in the biblical way of life is about family. It's the family that name, that family name, can continue for eternity, the rabbis point out. It's through learning how to honor. What's the fifth commandment?
Honor your father and mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be long and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you.
It's through hey. When we learn to honor and respect our parents, we then learn what it means to honor and respect God. This relationship between father and son and mother and daughter is representative here on earth what it can be or should be with our relationship with God. And unfortunately, when there's dysfunction in family, when there's brokenness in family, it tarnishes what it means to have this relationship with God. Because if I say, well, if God's like my Father, then I want nothing to do with God. Which is why we're going to get to in a couple weeks the importance of what the Torah says about how a father and a mother should act. Their responsibility is to represent, back to representing who God is for their children. They are to demonstrate mercy and grace and compassion and justice so that they can see this comes from God. And if I don't do that job, and if she doesn't do her job, they don't get it, and it doesn't get passed on. It's through this. Read that again. One more time. Yeah.
Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be long and that you may do well in the land that the Lord your God has given you.
Not only my relationship with God, but my life. When I recognize and honor my parents and recognize who they are, what does it say? My life will be what? Prosperous and long. Isn't that what we all want? To have a long and prosperous life? I mean, gosh, if anybody's seen Star Trek, anybody seen Star Trek? Right? Anybody? Nobody's seen Star Trek. Come on. Right? Star Trek. Spock always says what? Allie? Live long and prosper. And where does this come from? Who is Spock in real life? In real life, Spock is what? And Leonard Nimoy. And Leonard Nimoy is what? A Jew. And he grew up in the synagogue every week, and the rabbis would end their service every week, and they would do this weird thing, and they would bless the people, and they would raise their hands and put them together, and they would bless the community every single week. And we think, gosh, what a great line, live long and prosper. That's right from here, right from these commandments. That when you recognize this, I'm going to bless you, that you will live long and prosper. In a lot of synagogues, they do, yeah. They do. Now, I was thinking about going on and going the rest, but we've taught on this before, and there was something that stopped me to continue on, because there was something that, as I was looking at this, I wanted to give a little bit more context. And Roman stopped me the other day. He said something profound. He's like, we were watching The Walking Dead. We're in season 11, episode 12, right? And he said, Dad, could you imagine what it would be like if somebody just started watching at season 7? They would have no idea who these characters are, right? Especially season 11, they have no idea what's going on. They have clueless about all the previous people. Where's Michonne going? Who's the boot guy? Who's the great one? They have no idea who these people are. You would just pick it up and start reading. And they said, wait a second, that's kind of like what we do at the gathering, isn't it? He's like, we give context to what's going on. So we don't just start in the middle. We always go back. I'm like, that's right. That's why we call that context, culture, history, and language. So before I continue with all the rest, I thought, we should give a little context to this. Who is this person that's speaking? Who's the person that's writing this in Deuteronomy? Who is this person that's speaking in Deuteronomy? Who is it? It's Moses, right? Moses, and this was more than likely not something that he wrote. This was a speech that he was teaching the people audibly on a daily basis, right? Moses is at the end of his life. Moses is looking over on the other side is the Jordan River, and the people are about to cross over. And what is going to happen to him? He's not going. He knows he's not going. He can see the promised land. He can see that's where we're supposed to end up. And he knows in his heart, I'm not going there. I'm staying here. So I'm pleading with you. I'm going to give you one last sermon, one last teaching. I'm going to give all of this to you, and I'm begging you that you listen to me. I'm begging that you hear me, because I'm not going with you. I'm about to hand this off to my number 2 guy, to Joshua, Yehoshua, and he's going to lead you across. I'm not going with you. And as I looked at that and read that, I read Deuteronomy 5, verse 29. Read 29 and verse 32 for me, Aaron.
Oh, that they have such a heart as this always to fear me and to keep all my commandments, that it might go well with them and with their descendants forever. You shall be careful therefore to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left.
Very good. Does anybody else have a different translation? Anybody? Go ahead. 5:29 and verse 32.
Oh, that they had such a heart in them to fear me and to guard all my commands always, so that it might be well with them and with their children forever. And you shall guard to do as Yahweh your Elohim has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left.
My translation was the same as Deb's. It was a little bit different than Aaron's. And there was a word that stood out to me. And it was the word guard. And you shall guard to do as Jehovah your Elohim has commanded. You shall guard. And I thought, I've heard that word before. And I looked it up. It was a word that we taught on back in Numbers or Leviticus a few months ago. And the word for guard is samar. It's the idea of guarding, but it's also the idea of keeping, observing, heeding, and preserving. And as I looked this up and I was going through the places that it was at, I recognized that I saw it in the previous chapter, in chapter 4, as we talked about the 15 commandments. Right after that, you see this word, samar. In fact, you see it in verse 4, or chapter 4, verse 2, verse 6, verse 9, verse 15, verse 23, verse 40, chapter 5, verse 1. 7 times. And at verse 2, it's like the beginning of a new sermon. 7 times Moses says samar before he gets to the 10 commandments, before he gets to the 10 suggestions. Samar, 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 over and over and over. Then he begins the 10 commandments. Read verse 10 again. Or, I'm sorry, Deborah, you read verse 10 because you have the same translation as me. Verse 10. Guard my commands. He's began with the commandments. I am Yod-Heh-Vav. I don't have any other gods before me. Guard these commandments. What does he say in verse 12? You are to samar my commandments. You are to samar my Sabbath. Moses is emphatic, pleading with these people, samar these commandments. Guard them. Heed them. Preserve them. I want you to write those down, those 3 words. Guard, heed, preserve. Guard, heed, preserve. And as you write those, I want you to think and say, tell me, how can you guard his commandments? How can you heed these words? How can you preserve in your life? How can you? How will you? Anyone? Set your associations. Okay.
Blood, food, everything at all, especially so gardens. Preserve it. Lay down with the dog and get up with the fleas.
I was waiting for a good one. That's good. If I lay down with the dogs, I'm going to get up with the fleas. All right, so guard your company. Bad company, what? Corrupts good character. That's one way. All right, good. What else? How else can you keep, heed, preserve these commands? You got to work at it. Excellent. Very good. That leads me to last week, Walt talked about a bunch of stories, and one of the stories that he talked about was Martha and Mary. You remember? Martha and Mary had Yeshua to their house. And one of the greatest commandments in the biblical perspective of how to live is the idea of what? Hospitality. Somebody comes to my house, what should I do? What? Serve them, right? Sometimes if I'm really good, I might clean their feet, but I'm going to serve them and whatever their needs are. I'm going to clean up after them. I'm going to get them food. I'm going to give them drink. Like hospitality, I want to make you feel as welcomed as possible. And Martha goes to Yeshua and says what? Mary's not doing anything. Tell her, right? Don't you remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? Like that's why it was destroyed, because of lack of hospitality. Tell her to get up. And what does Yeshua say? She chose better. She chose the good portion. It says that Mary was sitting at the feet of Yeshua, which is a Hebrew idiom, which means what? When you sit at the feet of somebody, what is that idiom of? Like it's raining cats and dogs, right? This is an idiom. What? More than that. That means you are a disciple. Mary has chosen to be a disciple of Yeshua, which in this perspective is extremely important, because if we go back to the ancient wisdom that we talked about before, in Perikei Avot, it says this. This would have been something that I think that Yeshua was quoting. There you go. Perikei Avot 1:4 says this. Yosef ben Yozer, son of Zereda, and Yosef ben Yochanan of Jerusalem received the oral tradition for them, Shimon the righteous and Antigonus. Yosef ben Yozer used to say, let thy house be a house of meeting for the sages, and sit in the very dust of their feet, and drink in their words thirstily. This would have been something that was very well known when Yeshua made this statement, when this story was to everybody knew that the sages talked about this. Your home was supposed to be a home of hospitality, but most importantly, you do what? You drink the words of their teachings like you are parched. What's Mary doing? She's sitting at his feet, thirstily hearing and absorbing the words of Yeshua. What's Martha doing? She's working. I got to get this. I got to do all of these things. Martha was like, but this needs to be done. But this needs to be done. How often do we choose to not sit at the feet because the laundry's got to get done, because I got to pick up the kids, because I have so much work I have to do, because fill in the blank. What is the but in your life? What is the but that you say, I don't have time for you because this has to get done? Perikei Avot, the wisdom continues. 2:2 says this. Rabban Gamliel. Wait a second. Gamliel, is that a name that we've heard of before? Who's Gamliel? He was Paul's teacher, right? The Rabbi Shaul, the Rabbi Paul said, I was trained under the Rabbi Gamliel. This Gamliel said, excellent is the study of the Torah when combined with a worldly occupation, for the toil in them both keeps sin out of one's mind. I love this wisdom literature because so often we get caught in this idea, like, I'm so busy, if I could just stop working and do all, I would just study the Bible and I would just study the Torah, right? Because all of these things, the pastors, they have all this time to just, study. It continues, the ... there. It says, for the man who actually doesn't work and studies all day long will find himself in sin. The idea of Gamliel was like, look, we're a realist here. We're not supposed to just study the Torah all day. You're supposed to work. Go back to Genesis 1, right? Adam was put where? In the garden to do what? Work, right? So you're supposed to work, but you should study a little bit too, because when you add study, when you dig into this and you read and you meditate and you pray on this stuff and you work, this is what I found fascinating. It keeps sin. Nope, go back one. It keeps sin out of one's mind. How many of us would like to not struggle with sin? Would like to not struggle with anger, impatience, frustration, judgment? How many of us would like to be rid of those things? Gamliel says, study and work. The next passage, more Hebrew wisdom literature, says this: if a man learns 2 paragraphs of Torah in the morning and 2 in the evening and is engaged in work all day, it is ascribed to him as though he had fulfilled the Torah entirely. I bring these up because I find myself a lot of times in the but. I'd like to study, but. I'd like to have more time for prayer and meditation, but. We are a very busy people. We have jobs, we have kids, we have Uber duties to take our kids to practice and this and that, right? We're busy. But I thought maybe I can give a few suggestions, like these are suggestions to help us based on the wisdom that we just read. Because how do I do all this? How do you eat an elephant? How do you eat an elephant? How do you eat an elephant, Lindley? 1 bite at a time. And sometimes we have to start with little tiny bites. And so if prayer and meditation and study, and that's not anything that you do, start with a small bite. Before you go to work in the morning, you turn your car on, before you put it in reverse, pray. Let your car warm up and just start with a small prayer. Then, after you've done that and you've become routine in that, maybe you create a prayer list. Maybe you write down some things that you need to pray about. Maybe you write down a verse that you want to meditate on or think about throughout the day because it helps you. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Put this in your car so that as you're driving, you're reminded, this is what I want to think about today. This is what I want to meditate on. This is what I want to pray on. This is who I'm praying on. Because as we're driving from home to work, what are you typically thinking of? What? Right. Because you're not thinking about how to get to work, right? Because it's already autopiloted in your mind. You're always thinking about the next thing you're going to do, or this person, or the drama, or blah, blah, blah. What if instead your day began with praying about these things intentionally, instead of letting your mind just drift onto whatever, blah, 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 blah? Or maybe you listen to a podcast. We have suggestions. There's podcasts. FFOZ, you can listen to the Bible read to you. I don't have time to read, but you can listen to it in your car. You can listen to the portion in your car as you're driving. Or maybe we've used these before. There's 30 days in a month, sometimes 31, sometimes 29. Proverbs has 30 proverbs of wisdom. What if you read 1 proverb every day to give you wisdom in your work dealings, with your children that you have to teach, with the clients that you have to work with? What if you had just a little extra wisdom every day that you began with? You just read 1 proverb. Or what if you were wanting to be more like Jesus? I want to sit and drink the words of my Messiah, my Master, every day. How long does it take to read 1 chapter of a gospel? How long? Less than 5 minutes. Imagine if you read 1 chapter every day, 3 minutes, 4 minutes before you left for work. If you read 1 gospel, chapter 1 today, chapter 2 tomorrow, you would read through the gospels 4 times in a year. Can you spend 3 minutes with Yeshua? Do we have that time? But I'm so busy. Are we? Is this really Aleph? Does he really go before everything else? Is he really number 1 in my life? And heck, even Yeshua had difficulty, didn't he? When we read in Mark, All of these people wanted to be healed by him. All of these people were coming to him saying, I need you, I need you, I need you. And so what did he do? It says he woke up early in the morning when it was still dark, and he left his house, and he went and he prayed. How many of us are willing to get up a little bit, or 5 minutes, to pray, to read? Is he number one? Is he before everything else? I wanted to close with what Spock learned. Because the idea of this suggestions, the idea of this commandments was so that you would live long and prosper. And so I want everybody to bow their heads, close your eyes, and I want you to hear these words. I want you to hear the words that would be said as Yeshua heard them. May the Lord bless you and guard you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and show favor to you. May the Lord lift his face upon you and give you peace. Amen. May you live long and prosper.